When the restaurant owner humiliated a teenager in a plain t-shirt, he had no idea he was lighting the match that would burn his entire business to the ground. Protests, lawyers, shocking revelations. That was just the beginning. And the teenager, he came back to finish what was started. But let's start from the very beginning. Mornings at Crystal Fork were always chaotic, but not the kind of chaos you'd imagine at a high-end restaurant. The place was more like a stage for its owner, Mr. Henry Baines, to showcase his flair for turning even the smallest inconvenience into a grand spectacle. You could almost hear the staff silently betting on who'd get roasted next. Mr. Baines, with his signature squint and the kind of smirk that made people instantly question their life choices, was already in a foul mood. Maybe it was the coffee, or maybe someone dared to breathe too loudly in his presence. Either way, the atmosphere was thick with tension as the staff hurried to avoid catching his attention. Enter Barron Trump, a lanky 17-year-old who strolled into the restaurant like he didn't have a care in the world. He was dressed in a plain white t-shirt and a pair of worn-out jeans. Definitely not the polished elite look that Baines believed his establishment deserved. Barron slid into a corner booth, the kind of spot where you could sit and people watch without being noticed. Except, of course, he was noticed. Cindy, one of the newer waitresses, walked over to take his order. She was still finding her footing at Crystal Fork, juggling the stress of demanding customers and the ever-present fear of Mr. Baines's wrath. But something about this kid caught her off guard. He was polite, like genuinely polite, a rarity in a place where customers usually treated the staff like part of the decor. "What'll it be, hun?" Cindy asked, pulling out her notepad. "Just a burger and a cola, please," Barron replied, flashing a small smile. It was simple enough, but the way he said it with that calm demeanor made Cindy pause for a second. She jotted it down and headed toward the kitchen, shaking off her curiosity. That's when Baines made his entrance. He strutted across the dining area like he owned not just the restaurant, but the very air people were breathing. Spotting Barron, his expression shifted to one of immediate disapproval. "Why is that kid sitting here?" Baines asked Cindy, his voice dripping with disdain. He didn't even try to lower it. Barron could probably hear every word. He ordered a burger and Baines cut her off with a sharp wave of his hand. "Did you look at what he's wearing? Who comes to a respectable place like this dressed like that?" Cindy froze. I didn't think it was a problem. He's just..." "It is a problem," Baines snapped, already making his way toward Barron's table. Barron, who had been quietly reading the menu, glanced up as Baines loomed over him. The kid didn't flinch, didn't even blink. If anything, he looked mildly curious, like he was trying to figure out whether this was part of some elaborate dinner theater performance. "You realize this is a fine dining establishment, don't you?" Baines said, his voice oozing with condescension. "We don't serve just anyone off the street." Barron raised an eyebrow. "I didn't see anything in the menu about a dress code," he said calmly, his tone as neutral as if he were discussing the weather. That remark hit Baines like a slap. His face flushed and his lips curled into a sneer. "Get out," he said, jabbing a finger toward the door. "We don't need your kind here." Barron stood up, his movements deliberate and unhurried. He reached into his pocket, pulled out a couple of dollar bills, and placed them neatly on the table. Then, before turning to leave, he looked Baines straight in the eye and said, almost in a whisper, "Thanks for the hospitality. You'll be hearing from me." The entire restaurant went silent as the door closed behind him. Cindy stood frozen, gripping her notepad so tightly her knuckles turned white. Baines, on the other hand, looked smug, like he'd just won some unspoken battle. But if anyone had been paying attention, they might have noticed the subtle shift in the air, the quiet ripple of something bigger brewing. Barron's words weren't just a parting shot, they were a promise. The lunch rush at Crystal Fork had come and gone, but the tension in the air lingered like the smell of overcooked bacon. Customers shuffled in and out, oblivious to the brewing storm. Cindy, on the other hand, couldn't shake the uneasy feeling left by the earlier scene. It was like the restaurant itself was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. Just as she was wiping down a table, the shrill ring of the kitchen phone pierced the air. Cindy jumped. The landline hardly ever rang, and when it did, it was usually vendors calling to confirm deliveries. This, however, felt different. Chef Tony, who'd been chopping onions, nodded for her to answer. "Crystal Fork, how can I help you?" Cindy said, her voice wavering slightly. A crisp, professional tone came through the line. "We're calling from Channel 6 News. We've received reports about an incident involving your owner, Mr. Baines, and a young customer earlier today. Would you care to comment on his actions?" Cindy froze. Her mind raced. News? Reports? What incident? Then it hit her. Barron. She hadn't thought much of his parting words at the time, but now they echoed in her head like a warning. "You'll be hearing from me." Well, apparently the whole world was hearing about it now. I'm not authorized to comment," she stammered, gripping the phone so hard her fingers hurt. "You'd have to speak with Mr. Baines directly." "Thank you," the reporter said briskly, and the line went dead. Cindy hung up the phone and turned to Tony, who was watching her with raised eyebrows. "What's going on?" he asked, wiping his hands on a towel. "I think..." Cindy hesitated, then blurted out, "I think this is about that kid Baines kicked out earlier." Tony let out a low whistle. "Oh man, this is going to be a mess." Meanwhile, in his office, Mr. Baines was blissfully unaware of the growing chaos. He was scrolling through supplier emails when his phone buzzed with a notification, then another, and another. His curiosity quickly turned to dread as he opened the first one. It was a link to a video. The thumbnail showed him mid-gesture, pointing furiously at Barron, who looked as calm as a yoga instructor on vacation. Baines clicked play, and his stomach sank as the scene unfolded on screen. Someone had filmed the entire interaction. Worse, they'd uploaded it with the caption, "Owner of Crystal Fork humiliates teenage customer. Watch his response." The video had already racked up thousands of views, and the comments section was a battlefield. Words like disgusting and entitled peppered the feed. And then there was Barron's closing line. "Thanks for the hospitality. You'll be hearing from me." It had struck a nerve with viewers, who were now sharing the clip like wildfire. By mid-afternoon, the restaurant's usually quiet street had turned into a small but vocal protest. A handful of people had gathered outside, holding hastily made signs that read things like "Justice for All" and "Boycott Crystal Fork." Passers-by slowed down to gawk, some even joining in the chants. Cindy peeked through the blinds and felt her stomach flip. "What are they even doing here?" Baines barked as he stormed into the dining area, his face a shade of red that matched the ketchup bottles on the tables. "Do these people have nothing better to do?" Cindy didn't dare respond. Instead, she watched as Baines paced back and forth, muttering to himself. Then, in a move that surprised absolutely no one, he decided to double down. "I'll handle this," he announced, grabbing his blazer and marching toward the door. "Call the local news. Let's get some cameras here." Cindy's heart sank. This was going to end badly. The press conference was a disaster before it even began. Baines stood in front of the restaurant, arms crossed, his trademark smirk firmly in place. A small crowd of reporters had gathered, their cameras and microphones ready to capture every word. "This so-called controversy is ridiculous," he began, his tone dripping with arrogance. "That boy was just looking for attention. We don't have time for people like him here. This is an elite establishment. We cater to a certain standard." The reporters scribbled furiously, some of them exchanging knowing glances. Cindy, watching from the window, felt her cheeks flush with secondhand embarrassment. Did he really think this would make things better? No sooner had Baines finished speaking than the restaurant's staff began receiving notifications on their phones. Cindy glanced at hers and gasped. New videos were surfacing. Clips of former employees sharing horror stories about Baines, photos of rude notes he'd left for staff, and even an old article hinting at past discrimination lawsuits. The avalanche of bad press was relentless. By the time Baines returned inside, the protest outside had doubled in size, and social media was in full-blown outrage mode. Cindy watched as her boss slumped into a chair, his earlier bravado completely gone. For the first time that day, Baines looked genuinely worried. But if Cindy had learned one thing, it was that when it came to karma, worrying wouldn't save you. This storm wasn't letting up anytime soon. As dusk fell over the city, a sleek black car rolled up in front of Crystal Fork. The chatter from the restaurant's remaining patrons faded as the car door opened, and Barron Trump stepped out, this time flanked by two attorneys who looked like they had stepped straight out of a courtroom drama. Their tailored suits and sharp expressions sent a clear message. This wasn't a casual visit. Inside, the staff froze. Cindy, standing near the counter, felt her stomach drop. She had a sense that whatever was about to happen wouldn't be forgotten anytime soon. Barron walked in with a confidence that seemed to fill the entire room. He stopped just a few feet from the counter and raised his voice. "I'm not here for your burger," he announced. "I'm here for an apology." The room went still. All eyes turned to Mr. Baines, who stood near the register, his face darkening with anger. For a moment, it looked like he might brush it off, but Barron wasn't alone this time. One of the attorneys stepped forward and laid a stack of documents on the counter with a resounding slap. "These are statements from former employees and customers detailing discriminatory practices," the attorney began, their voice calm but cutting. "And these are petitions with thousands of signatures calling for accountability. Oh, and this," they slid one final paper forward, "is a notice of potential legal action." Baines stared at the papers, his usual smug demeanor quickly crumbling. He opened his mouth to speak, but the words wouldn't come. The attorney continued, "You can either apologize and attempt to salvage what little reputation you have left, or we proceed." The tension in the room was palpable. Staff and customers alike watched as Baines, visibly shaken, finally muttered, "I apologize to you and anyone else I may have wronged." Barron tilted his head slightly, a faint smirk crossing his face. "Let's hope next time you think twice before treating someone like they don't matter." With that, he turned and left, his attorneys close behind. The silence in the restaurant lingered long after the door swung shut. By morning, footage of the incident had gone viral. Social media erupted with hashtags like #boycott_crystal_fork, and the restaurant's reputation plummeted. Customers disappeared, and the dining room that was once bustling became eerily quiet. Cindy handed in her resignation that night, saying, "I'm not sticking around to watch this place sink." Within weeks, Baines was forced to sell the restaurant, a symbol of everything people were determined to stand against. As for Barron, when asked why he returned, he simply said, "Sometimes you have to remind people that the truth matters." And with that, he moved on, leaving a legacy that spoke for itself. What would you have done in Barron's place? Do you think he handled it the right way? Share your thoughts in the comments below, and let us know if you or someone you know has experienced a similar situation. Don't forget to like and share this story if it resonated with you. It's important to keep the conversation going. This story was created to shed light on a real problem and inspire positive change. Your voice matters, and together, we can make the world a better place.